As near as I can tell, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force started in its infancy, I guess, in Bedford, Virginia. This is according to Bonnie Burkhart's book. And I don't remember the exact date, but it doesn't really matter. We do know that by the 1990s, late 90s, they had really been gearing up, and they had dozens of offices around the country. And remember, the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, it is a cooperative organization by statute. Someone once told me it's just a loose group of people get together. No, there's a federal statute and of state, federal, and local officials. And these state, federal, and local officials gradually expanded, and their mission was initially to look into a wide variety of online crimes, but it gradually focused in on the children because, in part, we have always in this country been focused on sex crimes and sex offenses and been particularly sensitive, as many cultures have been, with crimes against children. Our most vulnerable people, the elderly, the people who were weaker. So it's not surprising at all that they began to grow and get more and more and more funding, that states and localities and private sector organizations began to work with them. And by 2008, the Protect Act of that year began to reflect on how the organization had been changing and on their disappointments, particularly with the Department of Justice, the disappointments from the legislative branch. And they had a wide variety of requirements that, there's the iterations of Jacob Wetterling's law and Megan's law, which certainly were parts of this too, which I'm not going to get totally into as we go through this brief history of it. But the bottom line is it began to morph into an organization that took on people going online and in the deep and dark web and enabling, where people were enabled to go after children in very creative ways. So far, everything sounds great. It's just what we want. But unfortunately, the pressure of Protect 2008, in my opinion, put the I.C.A.C mission on steroids. And so what I.C.A.C has begun to do, pushed by public pressure and by the desire of politicians to appear tough on this and to respond, I suppose, to their constituents, not to mention to the public drumbeat that that the politicians in part fed in a bizarre circle. I'm tempted to say another type of circle, which fed upon itself. So you had the public being told that things were worse than they were, that things were happening on the deep and dark web, and certainly they were very bad. You had the President's Council on pornography coming out in the 80s, and that just fed the fuel from behind. And then going forward, hearing about all these new venues where child predation occurred, you can see why it got bigger and bigger and bigger. But unfortunately, it got more, as it morphed out of shape and pushed to create new avenues and not meeting always with success. I.C.A.C itself came up with a formula for success, which I call the turnkey system. And what they do with that turnkey system is that they have ensnared a lot of innocent people too. And the reason I say that is very simple. You can argue with me all you want, but I.C.A.C to this day lies about their methods and what they do. They tell the story that they are simply sitting back and the entire tone and tenor of the conversation, hell, it's in their manuals, in their guidebooks on what their process is. It's right there. They just sit and wait for something to happen. And that is simply not what's happening in the overwhelming majority of cases. And where do they get most of the people in the overwhelming majority of cases? They're not from tips. They're not from people saying somebody's preying on my child, though that certainly happens. They're not even from long trafficking sets that they put together online in the deep and dark web, because many times those take years to develop. It takes years of intelligence, takes years of cracking, I suppose, encryption and what the real bad eggs are doing out there, hiding things. But this is easy, because on the proactive stings, they can get dozens and dozens and dozens with just a week or so of preparation. And we know this because it's been so successful that they've bragged about it. We've seen emails that I.C.A.C has fought tooth and nail not to bring to court cases. We have seen technology that they have not wanted to reveal. And they have, even in the early days, when it was more precarious for them, they had bowed out of cases rather than reveal technology and methods that they were using. And then they came upon a really nifty thing. And I'm not quite sure when this occurred. I want to say it was somewhere between 2010 and 2015. But they figured out that turnkey system where they could slip between the law and dance right, and the ethical nature of it, and dance right on that pin top, that head of the pin. And so what they did, well, let me back up just a little bit. So some of this was anticipated, this government overreach, in the mid 1980s, about the time that President Reagan was in office, and they were doing their big porn commission, the I.C.A.C commission, where they were looking at pornography all writ large, but also child pornography. They also developed then the Wiretap Act, as it's more colloquially known, in federal statute, and this was copied by all 50 states. And essentially what they did, in a rare moment of thoughtful legislation that not only met the moment but met the future moment, they said, anybody who taps any type of electronic communication, any electronic communication, if they were a government agent, they had to get a warrant. And increasingly since then, and you don't have to believe me, you can look through a number of books on the subject. I've talked about them here on my channel. But increasingly, they find ways around warrants, right? They have no-knock warrants, right? They have exigency warrants, I'll call them, where, well, if we don't get in there right away, something bad's going to happen. A child's going to be hurt. Evidence is going to be flushed down the toilet. So, there's been a number of ways that they've managed to, enforcing their way in, a number of ways that they have simply managed to get around the production of warrants. And it really depends on the individual judge, their background, their training, and what they're willing to put up with for you to decide whether you to get a favorable ruling on your case. Okay? And then you have to decide if you're going to appeal it. And once you lose, your avenue for appeal is significantly narrowed. Well, that's what's happening. Now we look at today, and I.C.A.C, having been pressured by state, federal, local officials, and seeing that grabbing all these people through this turnkey system certainly makes it look like they're being tough on crime. Heck, our current governor-elect has been running ads about that for some time for her last two congressional and her gubernatorial elections. So now they have these excellent turnkey systems in place. They are getting gobs and gobs of people in the proactive stings. And to cement that notion down, they're calling everybody a pedophile. And they're so anxious to do this. Again, I refer you to the July 2022 General Accountability Office report commissioned or requested by Congress, asking how well they were doing some 25 years or so after they were going. Most of it is anecdotal. It comes from the police themselves. But you know what the police keep saying? If you read this report, they refer to the people that they target without cause because they admit they're just fishing. As Detective Bauer said in my case, I just went on there to see if I could find any person who might be wanting to hurt kids. Of course, hurting kids is subject to interpretation, isn't it? What does that mean? So he didn't have it wasn't a reactive sting. He didn't have a child in mind. Nobody called and said, hey, there's a child in danger. There's nobody around. And he wasn't just sitting there looking around. He was actively engaged in it. And this active engagement through their turnkey system is what's spitting out large and ever larger numbers, which they then feed that frenzy of fear that they have created in the public and in the media. And they tell everybody, these people are pedophiles. These are child predators. And they throw the P word, whether it be pedophile or predator, around with such alacrity that it's amazing that they don't have more to show for it, because almost everybody is netted in that definition. And when I say everybody, anybody that they put the stigmat on, anybody that they put their finger on, okay? This stigma, that stigma, the full stigmata of it, not unlike the Christ stigmata of a different definition, but the one in which they nail whole groups of people at once. These people then have their lives ruined, and not just from a conviction that was false in many ways, but from a reputational damage for themselves and their family, and from the sick, just twisted fantasies of these officers. And you can really call it a fantasy. I know some people have, and they're not entirely wrong. If the police officer is the one directing the conversation, approaching the person, suggesting this, and the person tells them no, 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 as I did, as many other people do, and they continue to persist, what is that about? Does that say something about the number of pedophiles we have? Or does that say something about the police officer desperate to prove something to his commander and get those stats raised? What is it saying? That they're not going on there and just sitting and watching. Why aren't they? Why aren't they just sitting and watching? That's what they claim they do. I mean, obviously, I'm talking about the proactive stings. I'm not talking about the reactive ones where you hear all of a sudden that somebody's niece or nephew is in danger. No, that you act on right away. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about setting people up, for lack of a better term. And the public has been trained so much and given so much leeway now that it is morphed yet again to allow vigilantes to be working with police, even violating police, that is, their oath of office, by having these vigilantes actually do the catch, so to speak, as they love to call it, do the questioning. And they're so emboldened that they're coming on my channel and demanding things of me, demanding I confess, demanding that I admit to X, Y, or Z, because they're so used to getting away with the demand. Thank God we have places around the country and around the world that are putting these people in irons for this, that are arresting them, that are charging them with misdemeanors and felonies for being involved in a direct way, savaging people's due process, lying to them, becoming decoys themselves, and in the process, making it into a tidy little business. We've already seen that hedge funds have started getting involved with the registry. And because they have, you know that the registry must be a lucrative little operation, because it would not have garnered the attention of a hedge fund. How long will it be before the hedge funds get involved in running these stings, I wonder? How long will it be before the police get further monies, because they're already funded by operations like Thorn and Alicia's Project and others, who also have victims there who are monetizing their victimhood in the name of supposedly educating people. And I am on the receiving end of this myself right now, by people who want to say, well, you must be doing X, Y, and Z. And they're finding the most obscure references to make sure that those references get attached to you, because they're in on the game as well. Now, they're not, big lucrative rollers, but they have convinced themselves, for whatever reason, that they have a role to play in this whole mess. And because of that, we see it morphing in different directions to include trolls and so-called predator hunters. And by the way, they are the predators themselves, but what they mean, of course, are people who would exploit children. In this mix, of course, you have the Romeo and Juliet cases, where you have, as I've said, a 17-year-old boy who has a 16-year-old girlfriend, and they exchange some pictures. He turns 18, and the phone is turned over to the police, and he's charged with child pornography. We have the people who are simple exposure cases, or what used to be just common, nobody thought of it. You're on a fishing boat or something, you're peeing off the side. These are all things that I get told all the time, well, that doesn't really happen, but it does. By expanding the definition of child sex abuse material from child pornography, nearly anything can qualify, depending on who wants to make the case. And over again, the police are making the case, and their case is being allowed to stand. And don't they have a conflict of interest? Well, that's what the Constitution is supposed to be there for, but the Fourth Amendment has been trashed over and over again. We talked about how the Fifth and Sixth Amendment, the warrants, etc., how you can't face your accuser because your accuser doesn't really exist as the child that you have been baited with, that you have been told you can only have the parent if you also take the child, and whatever other schemes, sick schemes that the police come up with. See, because they have to keep coming up with new scams in order to not only keep the public off guard, but also keep those stats coming in. Because if they don't do it, they won't keep those numbers up. And that's the sick part of it. In effect, you have police pimping decoy children, helping to contribute to a prurient interest in children, or creating it if it wasn't there to begin with. Is that what we want the police to do? Is that what we really want police up to? We want them to create this system where they're creating crimes over and over again. Is that what we want to have happen? We have people who are drunk and high on social media sites. Sort of the public derelicts of before, who might be arrested by, passing out outside the bar or something. We have the people who say, nah, I know you're a cop, and I'm going to go there and stick my finger in your chest and tell you you're a cop. I know you're full of it, and they're getting arrested. We have people like me who have received considerable training in recognizing this, thought they had it, moved to do something about it, and as a result, also got ruined. Is this what we really want? Is this really protecting children? Tell me how. Show me the statistics where the system I have just outlined is protecting children. Well, we have surely asked for it, and surprise, surprise, they don't have it. The statistics they provided us only after a huge battle in the courts. The statistics are, not disaggregated, meaning they are not divided up into clear categories with clear and consistent numbers. They are often lumped together with child prostitution or human prostitution, human trafficking, labor trafficking, as well as sex trafficking. And the jumble is up so much that police don't want to give them to you and then don't want to explain it. I've told you before how we've asked a number of different venues, and we're told it's thousands until you get down to the numbers and you find out it's just a few dozen. And then we have to look into those dozen, because if you compare it to media reports, you would think that you had a Jeffrey Dahmer on your hands sometimes. If we can't be honest about those numbers and those figures, and we can't get the police who are supposed to be serving us to really be on the lookout for real child predation, not manufactured predation, then we're never going to really find out what's happening. Surely on the deep and dark web, where you have very sophisticated actors who are trafficking children, surely we can all agree on that. But some of this other stuff, if we pulled back from it, what would happen? Well, you'd see the numbers go down, and we can't have that. When recently, this past summer, I believe it was, out in Washington State, a member of their Metcalf unit, which is like I.C.A.C. out there, the net nanny, they run the net nanny stings. That's the, I think, Washington State Patrol equivalent. They said through a spokesperson, testimony before the legislature out there, that but for the fact that they arrived in the nick of time, there'd be worse consequences for children. How do we know that? How do we know that? When you ask them, the best they can say is, well, we just know because, when we show up, we arrest people. Well, as we have said any number of times and demonstrated on this channel and on Stinging Back, among others, as Lady Justice Smith has pointed out, this is not what is actually happening. This is a false flag. This is a lie. This is what police would have you believe so that they don't have to actually put down all their cards and prove it. Trust us, we know. If we weren't there, something terrible would happen. Well, you don't want anything terrible to happen, so you're happy to let them get away with it until it happens to your nephew, your friend, your neighbor, your teacher, your beloved pastor. And again, all of these people, neighbors, pastors, teachers, police officers, have done terrible things and do. But that is not an excuse to say that all of them do. It is not an excuse to say all of them caught in these things must be, and we have to trust our police. It is so ingrained in our system that when I went before the magistrate and began to learn that Detective Bauer was Alex VA and that there was no Alex VA, and he wouldn't answer my question, I told the magistrate there were several things that were wrong with this sting, and I explained what they were. The magistrate looked sympathetic, but she looked at me and she said, well, and I'm quoting now, I have to believe him. He's the police officer. And that tells you all you need to know, I think, about a system that is roundly corrupt and doesn't protect the citizen or the child. It protects the people who are guilty of making a mistake.